The old man didn't look up when they walked in. He never did. He just kept moving the mop in slow, even strokes across the worn tile floor of the base training facility, steady, unhurried, like a man who had nowhere else to be and no reason to rush. His uniform was plain, no rank, no insignia, just a grey maintenance shirt, a pair of scuffed boots, and a face so weathered it looked like it had been carved out of the same desert he'd been sweeping dust from for years. Nobody paid him attention. That was the point. It was the first morning of Advanced Combat Leadership Evaluation, the week that separated the ones who thought they were ready from the ones who actually were. 32 of the Army's highest-scoring junior officers had been selected from across 4 different bases, flown in before dawn, and now sat in folding chairs arranged in tight rows inside the evaluation hall, too wired to be tired, too competitive to admit they were nervous. Every one of them had earned their seat. Every one of them knew it. And every one of them was quietly sizing up the others, calculating where they stood in the invisible hierarchy that forms the moment soldiers are placed in the same room. Second Lieutenant Daniel Rourke walked in last, which was either arrogance or confidence, and the difference between those two things is exactly what the week was designed to test. He was 26, 2 years out of West Point, and the kind of officer who had compiled enough commendations in a short career that people started using the word exceptional before they'd even finished describing him. He carried himself accordingly, not loudly, not obnoxiously, just with the particular ease of someone who had never once doubted that the room was going to turn out in his favor. He found a seat near the front, set down his gear, and that's when he noticed the old man. The mop had found its way close to the edge of the chairs. Close enough that Rourke had to shift his bag slightly to one side. He did it without looking up, and then, because a few of the other lieutenants were watching and the silence needed something to fill it, he made a sound that was almost a laugh, small, dismissive, barely audible, and said to no one in particular, "Somebody tell maintenance the room's occupied." A few people smiled, 1 or 2 looked away. The old man didn't respond. He just moved the mop to a different section of the floor, his back to the room now, his pace unchanged, slow, even, deliberate. And for a moment, just a moment, one of the lieutenants near the back wall, a woman named Captain Serena Voss, who had arrived the night before as a junior observer, looked up from her notes with an expression that was impossible to read. Not shock, not alarm, something quieter than that. Something that looked almost like recognition. She wrote one word in the margin of her notepad and circled it. Careful. The evaluators arrived at 0700 sharp. Colonel Whitmore led the briefing, a lean, precise man who spoke in structured sentences and wasted exactly 0 words. He outlined the week's format, a series of simulated command scenarios, each one designed to escalate in complexity and ambiguity. There would be no clear right answers. There would be no rescue from confusion. There would only be the decisions made, the reasoning behind them, and whether those decisions held up under pressure. "Your performance here," he said, eyes moving across the rows, "will determine placement for the next tier of command assignments. Some of you will be recommended, some of you will not." No one moved. "The first scenario begins in 40 minutes. Study the terrain maps on your tablets. Identify your command priorities. Be ready to defend every choice." He closed the briefing folder. And that was when the old man with the mop walked out of the room. Rourke watched him go, mostly because there was nothing else to look at in that particular direction, and thought nothing of it. A maintenance worker leaving before the exercise began. Routine. Unremarkable. He turned back to his tablet and got to work. The first 2 scenarios went the way Rourke expected, which is to say, they went well. He was decisive without being reckless. He communicated clearly. He absorbed the shifting variables and adapted without losing the thread of his original intent. Colonel Whitmore gave nothing away, but a few of the other evaluators made notes at moments that felt, to the trained eye, like acknowledgement. Rourke noticed. He always noticed things like that. By the end of the second day, A quiet confidence had settled over him that was different from what he'd walked in with. The first day's confidence had been anticipation. This was something more solid, something earned. That night, in the officers' common area, the group unwound in the way soldiers do after focused days, low voices, bad coffee, the kind of conversation that orbits the day's events without landing directly on them. Rourke sat at the far end of the table with two other lieutenants and talked through the afternoon's scenario. They were good. He knew it. He was better. He knew that too, and was careful enough not to say it out loud. It was during that conversation that the door opened. The old man stepped inside. He was carrying a small toolbox this time, something to do with a flickering light fixture in the far corner that had been buzzing faintly all evening. Nobody looked up immediately. A few glanced over and then looked away, the way people do when someone enters a space they've already categorized as background. Rourke watched him for a moment, something unfocused and idle in his attention, and then said, again to the table more than to the man, "Does he live here, or what?" It got a tired laugh. The old man set down his toolbox. He opened it slowly. He began working on the light fixture with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything else. And in the silence that followed, Captain Voss, who had been sitting alone across the room with a book she hadn't been reading, looked up at Rourke with something in her expression that was different from before. Not disapproval, not warning, just observation, the kind that stores itself quietly and waits. Day 3 was when things changed. The morning scenario was the most complex yet. A multi-unit coordination problem with conflicting intelligence reports, 2 command nodes going dark mid-exercise, and a time constraint that was designed to be just short enough to make clean decisions nearly impossible. Half the group struggled visibly. A few made the kind of calls that would have cost lives in a real deployment. Rourke navigated it cleanly, made 3 decisions that Whitmore later described, in the flattest possible tone, as sound. From a man like Whitmore, that was high praise. Rourke knew it. Lunch was quieter than the previous days. The weight of the morning had settled differently on different people. Some were recalibrating, some were rattled. A few had gone very still in the way that precedes either clarity or collapse. It was in that quiet that the door to the briefing room opened, and the old man walked in again. No mop this time, no toolbox. He was carrying a single manila folder. He walked to the front of the room without hesitation, set the folder on the briefing table, and turned to face 32 junior officers who were now staring at him with the confused attention of people who have just realized the map they've been reading might be wrong. He didn't adjust his uniform. He didn't announce himself. He just stood there for a moment. The way people stand when they've spent so many years being the most capable person in any given room that they've completely stopped needing others to confirm it. Colonel Whitmore stepped in behind him, came to a stop, and said 4 words. "This is your evaluator." The silence that followed was unlike any silence the room had produced before. "Command Sergeant Major David Rail," Whitmore continued, his voice even. 31 years of active service, 4 combat deployments, 2 Silver Stars, a Distinguished Service Cross, and more classified commendations than I am authorized to describe in this setting. He has been your evaluator since Monday morning. Nobody moved. Everything you did in this room was observed. Everything you said in the hallways was noted, and everything you chose not to notice, Whitmore paused, just long enough for the weight of it to land, was also recorded. Rourke didn't move either, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with the scenarios or the tablets or the command decisions he'd been so proud of. It had to do with a mop, with 2 dismissive comments made to no one in particular, with the small, reflexive laugh that had felt like nothing at the time and now sat in his chest like something very heavy. Command Sergeant Major Rail opened the folder. He did not look at it. He looked at the room instead, the same steady, unhurried gaze he had carried through 3 days of invisibility. And when he spoke, his voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. "Leadership," he said, "is not a performance you give when the audience is watching. It is the sum of every decision you make when you believe no one is." The room stayed very still. "Some of you passed this evaluation with your tactics," he continued. "Some of you failed it with your manners. Before we find out what happened next, if you believe every soldier deserves to be seen for who they are, not how they look, drop a comment below. And if you've never heard of Code of Valor, hit that subscribe button, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here every single time." What followed was not what Rourke expected. There was no formal reprimand, no public correction, no removal from the evaluation. Rael simply moved through the room, methodically, deliberately, and spent the next 4 hours doing something no evaluator in the program's history had done before. He sat with each officer, not to review their tactical performance, to talk, to ask questions that had nothing to do with command scenarios and everything to do with how they saw the world. What do you notice first when you walk into a room? When was the last time someone surprised you, and why? Describe a moment when you were wrong about a person. Rourke sat across from him and felt, for the first time in 3 days, genuinely unprepared. Because there were no right answers to these questions, and for a man who had built his entire, young career on being the person with the right answer, that absence was disorienting in a way that no tactical scenario had managed to be. "You're good," Rael said to him after a pause that lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. "Your decisions under pressure are clean, your communication is efficient, your instincts are mostly sound." Rourke waited. "But you walked past me 3 times in 2 days, Rael said, "and not once did you consider that I might be worth understanding." There was no anger in it, no performance of disappointment, just a statement of fact delivered with the same precision the man brought to everything. "The most dangerous assumption a leader can make," Rael continued, "is that rank is visible. That capability announces itself. That the person who holds the key to a situation will always look the part." He closed the folder. "It usually won't," he said. "And the officer who hasn't learned that yet is the most expensive liability on any battlefield." The evaluation concluded on Friday. 17 of the 32 officers received placement recommendations. Rourke was one of them. His tactical performance had been that strong, and Rael was not a man who allowed personal lessons to contaminate objective assessment. But the recommendation came with a note, 3 lines, written in a hand that had signed orders in 4 different combat theaters. "Strong instincts, clear under pressure, has not yet learned to see the whole room. Recommend mentorship track alongside placement." Rourke read it twice, then he folded it and put it in his breast pocket, where he kept it for the next 6 years. He would tell the story later. Years later, when he was the one standing at the front of rooms like that one, not as a cautionary tale about humility in the abstract, but as something more specific, more honest. "I had spent 2 years building a reputation on being observant," he would say, "and in 3 days I proved I had no idea what observation actually meant. Because observation is not counting the right variables on a tactical map. It is not reading terrain or tracking movement or anticipating a threat vector. Those things matter. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient. Real observation, the kind that separates the leaders who are merely effective from the ones who become something more, is the ability to look at a person doing something ordinary and ask the question most people never think to ask. Who is this really? Not who do they appear to be? Not what role have they been assigned in this particular moment? Not what does their uniform tell me, or their age, or their position in the room? Who are they? Rael had spent 31 years building a career on answering that question faster and more accurately than anyone around him. In firefights, in command posts, in conference rooms, and apparently in maintenance uniforms on tile floors while junior officers laughed quietly at his mop. He had seen it all. He had let it happen because letting it happen was the test. And the result, every time, without exception, told him everything he needed to know about the person being observed. Captain Voss caught up with Rourke on the last morning, outside the facility, bags packed, transport waiting. "You figured it out on day 3, she said. It wasn't a question. Rourke looked at her. What gave it away? The way you went quiet, she said. Most people get louder when they realize they've made a mistake. They justify. They redirect. They find something else to be right about. She paused. You just got very still. He was quiet for a moment. Is that good or bad? Voss looked out at the early light cutting flat and long across the training ground. It's the beginning, she said. Whether it becomes good or bad depends on what you do next. The transport pulled up. Doors opened. People moved. Rourke picked up his bag and walked toward it, and in his breast pocket, folded against his chest, 3 lines in a careful hand reminded him, as they would continue to remind him for years, that the most important thing a leader can learn has nothing to do with command and everything to do with a question simple enough to overlook. Who is this really? Because the most decorated person in any room is rarely the one asking to be seen, and the leader who understands that, who carries it not as a lesson learned once but as a way of moving through the world, will never be caught off guard by a man with a mop again, and they will never need to be. Welcome to Code of Valor, where every story is a lesson, and every lesson was earned. Subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next.